All right, so first we're talking about special effects and how they align with production design. When effects are accomplished on set, they are special effects, or also known as practical effects. Just like how a production designer should plan for visual effects, they also need to be able to plan for practical effects, or how they might realistically pull off an effect if it's done practically on set. So they need to be sure that it's going to look good and have ideas for how it's going to be done if that's what they need to do, because they need to know which route to take, which route's going to be better, which route's going to be cheaper and more effective. A production designer should keep costs of both going with either advocating for practical effects for the scene or shot, or letting visual effects and CGI take over if it's deemed that it's too expensive to get realistic, or that you just can't get it realistically done with practical effects. Like CGI characters, they're CGI for a reason now. Most of those, where it used to be like not animated, but animatrons and things like that, you could kind of tell. So if new movies would do that, it would kind of date the effects more so than CGI might. That's not saying that they don't still use it, but they usually use a mixture of it, depending on what it is and what the character is, how much movement it needs to do and stuff like that.
Also, like what type of budget the movie has, because sometimes they will try to get away with older animatronics and practical effects. Because it's way cheaper now.
Some do it just because of like
the nostalgia of it as well. It's
like Mandalorian with the little baby Yoda thing, Grogu or whatever.
Yeah,
he's an actual little puppet because Yoda was a puppet, so it's kind of like we're going to use practical effects.
It's also
for a reason. But I do feel like they definitely use some CGI mixed in or just visually enhanced it. I'm not 100% on that, but it does feel
like there is definitely a blend now, because people do miss the nostalgia, especially of those old projects, and the look was part of it. And the thing is, there is such a thing, like whenever people talk about the uncanny valley, it's basically like you don't want it to be too much of a mix between realistic and practical, because it'll look really creepy and weird and our brain won't be able to translate it, because it'll just look bizarre if it's trying too hard to look overly realistic and it's failing. So sometimes they'll lean into the practical effects a little more, the more puppet looking thing or the animatronic looking thing a little more, because that will look better visually than like if you mix the two and you just get something bizarre.
Yeah, like they do try to do full CGI people. It just usually people can tell really quickly that it's CGI whenever that's done. So they usually use like a real person that looks similar to whatever actor they're trying to portray, and then they overlay their face with different features to make them look more like the original.
Kind of like what they're doing right now with the de-aging technology.
Yeah, and then it's usually a stand-in person there, both for the actors and for just the CGI artist to have something to work on instead of it just being a blank canvas for them to try to make a whole face out of. Because light, the way light shapes the face on the set and the skin reacts to it and things like that are all going to be very different based on lighting in the room and just how the room is set up. All right, this stuff comes from masterclass.com. It's letter H in the syllabus. Right here. Practical effects can include creature design with the use of prosthetic makeup. So any creature design you see, a lot of that, it can be, like we're just saying, either CGI, it can be practical effects, or it can be a mixture of both. It could also be puppetry. Like I said, Baby Yoda. There's the guy doing the puppet, making him move around and reach up. Animatronics, like Priscilla was saying. This is another puppetry example. This is from Spider-Man 2. It's the Dr. Octopus arms. You can see the guys on the sides moving the arms around.
Well, those arms are definitely a mix of practical and CGI. you can clearly tell when you watch the movie as well.
Actually, yeah, they are, but like a lot of it was actually practical, which I thought was interesting.
No, yeah, but I mean, the fighting sequences is where they use the CGI, or they would layer, like just put a layer of CGI just so it looked a little less.
For lighting effects and things like that. Yep. Yeah, but I was actually interested to see like how it. If you watch the behind the scenes in Spider-Man 2, you can see it, how they use the puppets to make it look like it was coming from the actor, and how they had to match whatever he was moving. So his movements had to be exactly like the puppetry, and so they had to have his movements down before they actually shot the scene. So he couldn't just like move out of order, out of sequence, which for some actors it's really hard to do. So I thought that was actually interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it is very talented.
With animatronics, that's where it's kind of like a little robot of some sort, robot human face, robot dog, animal creature underneath, and then they put like a fur coat basically over it to make it look more like an actual animal. And then it can move around and it can react like a real animal might.
Oh, when they're using animal movies where they make the animals talk and stuff, they will use an actual animal. And I've heard that they will, I don't know if they do this anymore, if it's like ethical or not, I don't know, but they would put like something in the animal's mouth that they would move, like kind of like a gum thing, where they would move like this. Oh, sorry, you can't see. Basically, it would make them move their mouth up and down a little bit. And then the way that they do it is they would take the actual animal and their movements, and then they just layer CGI, or they'd have an animatronic version that probably looks a little crappier. And then I don't know if they blend it, but I've seen a few behind the scenes of movies like that where they have like a real life dog and then an animatronic dog.
Yeah, and so it's usually a mixture of these whenever they're doing practical effects on bigger movies. On smaller budget movies, sometimes they go fully with practical and they just try to make it as best as they can. I would say, in my opinion, the best is usually a mixture of the two in some way or shape or form. It just gives the actor something to react to, and it gives the CGI visual effects artists something to work off of and something to enhance instead of just create fully from scratch. So I would say like it helps in a few different ways, just from the obvious of it actually being on camera. But some movies will go fully practical and use just animatronics, where it's like a moving robot, or they will use puppetry, where it's people moving it around off out of frame, and then they like remove the wires or whatever is the thing moving the puppet around.
Yeah, they'll either like do a mix of like the animatronic with a layer of CGI or a layer of green screen to hide the wires or the hands.
Yep, like this.
Gloves.
And they take away those guys' hands and make it just the robot arms. Practical effects are also including environmental manipulation, like in this, the ground physically shaking for an earthquake scene, or they could have things moving around in a house, like the photos, lamps, and other elements that are preset to shake around, and they like basically flip a switch and have the thing shake back and forth on a machine, and to make it look like it's coming from like an earthquake or some other kind of environmental effect. Practical effects also include miniature sets. So if you're ever shooting on that, that's practical because you're doing it in camera, trying to make the effect look like it's an actual big scene when really it's a miniature, like we already learned. Any kind of pyrotechnics like fire or explosions, smoke and fireworks, that's actually happening on set is practical effects, instead of just adding all of that later in post. Again, sometimes this stuff is enhanced with CGI and sometimes it is fully done in camera and just color graded differently in post to get a more realistic look or to get a more stylized look. Pyrotechnics require a licensed individual to be on set for handling and safety. So anytime you have any of that stuff on your set, you're supposed to have somebody there to make sure it's all safe and nobody's going to get hurt.
Because you're basically using a mixture of like electricity with
explosive material.
Yeah, And it's a lot of messing with wires and hardware and a lot of things that can either cause explosions or shocks, or that can actually harm you while building it if you don't know what you're doing.
Especially if it's something like this where the guy is actually the one on fire. That would be a stunt, and a stunt person would have to actually do this, and then there would have to be a stunt coordinator and a safety guide there to make sure everything is going smoothly and that this guy's not going to die, or girl isn't going to die from being on fire. Any stop motion is also practical effects. I actually found this. I'm not sure if this is the actual scene or not, but I remember Brian was talking about Jurassic Park's stop motion scene. I found this, and I feel like it might be what he was talking about, like what they almost went with, but then they didn't. Or it could be somebody recreating the scene. So not really sure. We watched a few videos on it, and I'm not sure which one's the actual.
Yeah, we did. Basically, the video was showing how they were going to just use animatronics and models, and then they found someone who was doing some really revolutionary work with CGI and stuff, and he showed them what he could do with the dinosaurs, and it was a lot of layering from what I saw. There was a lot of like layering one on top of the other, but it turned out pretty revolutionary for the time.
Mm-hmm. Any kind of vehicular stunts like a car, a boat, or plane crashes, which are typically combined with pyrotechnics of an exploded vehicle. So something like this, where the car catches on fire and the cars are all hitting into each other, that would be another case of practical effects, because it's actually done in camera on set, and it's either pre-designed to fall apart that way, which means it's actually just like a mechanic that pops the hood off, or they actually crash it into the building. It just depends on what they're doing on the actual set, but either way, it's going to be practical effects. And then of course they might add extra fire or a huge explosion to it in post-production with visual effects. Then you have weather elements like rain, wind, snow. If practical effects are approved, a production designer needs to think about how to work with those moments. If there's a giant fan that's being used, the designer may want to use heavier props and dressing so that they don't blow out of the way, or they may need to create heavy replica versions of props and set dressing so that when the fan is blowing, the stuff reacts the way they want it to, and when it's not blowing, the stuff still looks the way they want it to. So basically, it's not going to change based on the environment of the scene. If there will be any fire, a designer may want to use less flammable elements if possible. They might want to remove some things or make some fireproof versions of the same materials that's going to be closer to any of the fire elements or anything like that. And then there's also the changes to color.
Oh, they would also have a dummy. If they're going to set someone on fire, for example, sometimes they will like start a scene with a flame-proof article of clothing, and it'll start like a little fire, and then they'll substitute it and have like a dummy or a model with the whole thing setting on fire. They'll like switch like cut, and then they'll put the dummy in, and then they'll set it completely on fire.
Mm-hmm. And that way they can keep the fire going on the thing.
Yeah.
If they need it to be there for longer than you can actually have for a real person in camera. And then there's also the changes to color that may come from the fire or other weather elements that a production designer needs to take into consideration. So they need to be aware of all the different practical effects that are going to happen, because they need to take all those things into account and make sure that they're going to have the colors of their stuff and the weight and the reaction of all of their items react the way the director wants, and that they are communicating with the director to make sure that they're both in an understanding of what is going to happen when those elements are added.
And like we mentioned, having multiple copies and multiple versions of that prop or of that material, because you're probably going to have to do multiple shoots. Things can go wrong. You might have to take a retake or a reshoot of something.
Things get broken or lost.
Yeah. So they normally make multiple different units of the thing.
Yes. All right, this stuff comes from nfi.edu. It's letter I in the syllabus. And there's also, with practical effects, you also have all of that stuff plus like breakaway furniture, anything that the stunt double or the actor, if they're doing their own stunts, is going to sit on or stand on or throw something on, and the thing's going to break and fall apart with quite easily. Breakaway furniture will be needed. Breakaway windows, if they're ever getting shoved through a window or falling out of a window or something's thrown through one, they need a breakaway window for that. And then breakaway walls, where the people are crashing through the walls, or the superheroes bringing them through a whole building. Those walls are, if they're done in camera, if they're actually done on set, that will be a practical effect. Sometimes those are kind of done in post-production. And then again, sometimes it's just a mixture of both. Also, forced perspective is is a practical effect, and that's where you make something appear larger or smaller in the camera than it really would be, because you're positioning it closer or farther away from the lens. You're making somebody appear huge and somebody appear small, but all you're really doing is putting somebody really far away from the camera and lining up the camera so it looks like they're both standing at the same spot and making them look like they're looking at each other. And when in reality, they're just looking at the walls or a mark that they have set. So that would be a practical effect as well. Practical effects are often favored when possible because they look more realistic than CGI for the most part. And though CGI is getting better every day, depending on the effect, doing it practically often turns out better and more realistic than when entirely doing it digitally. So that's basically what Priscilla and I were talking about earlier. A lot of films do a bit of a hybrid, like we were saying, doing practical effects and then making them better and enhancing them with visual effects and CGI, rather than doing it wholly practical or wholly digital. Production designers need to be able to know what will look good and what won't, so they can help the director get the best looking shots and the producer get the cheaper option. Another reason that practical effects are often favored is because it helps the actors have something to work off of. The ground actually shaking instead of them pretending and then adding the camera shake in later. If the ground actually is on a platform that shakes, it's just going to come out so much more realistic because the actor doesn't need to pretend to do that while they're doing their lines and their scene and moving around and doing whatever they have to do in the scene. They can actually just react realistically to a shaking ground. An actual explosion, they'll actually have the timing and the shock of it instead of now there's an explosion over there, and they have to pretend there's an explosion going on in the scene, something actually popping out and scaring them. A lot of directors will vouch for trying to do an actual element that the actors are unaware of, or they just aren't aware of when it will happen, so that they actually are a little scared. And so then their reaction's a bit more realistic to the way that their body just automatically reacts to something popping out of them or something happening.
Honestly, hopefully within reason. It's not Stanley Kubrick yet. But
yeah, there are some, rules against doing like abuse type stuff, but
now
actually pranking somebody or something like that, I don't think that's really considered. Maybe it is, but usually it's still okay. If there's actually heavy wind blown from a fan,
I feel like as long as you're not risking their life, it's not a safety risk. It's okay for the performance, and of course, it's always good to have like a good relationship with your talent, to where they're comfortable with you. They know you're not going to put them in dangerous situations. So if you do like spook them from a realistic effect, it's not going to cause like a whole situation.
Yeah. Honestly, a lot of directors will do that too, especially when the actor isn't giving them the performance that's needed. But it's because those kinds of performances are really hard to get correct, because our bodies just shake or do like a quick jerk away or fight or flight reaction based on if we're actually in that situation. So it's really hard to mimic without actually having it happen.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I feel like we all know the difference. Like when we're expecting something to when, even when we are expecting it, like when it takes us by surprise, it's something that is very hard to mimic.
Yeah, and especially if it's supposed to be like something like, all right, there's a CGI monster over there in the woods. So you're gonna look at it, it's gonna pop out behind the tree, and we're gonna tell you when, and you react to it. And then they actually just get something to pop out outside of the tree that they weren't expecting because they just thought it was CGI. And then they actually react to something popping out of the tree, and everybody wins. But also, if you do practical effects like using actual heavy winds blown from a fan, that's making the actor need to raise their voice naturally and more. So it's just a lot better for the actor and for the director to get the performance they want because it's just real. Instead of them having to pretend to yell over the noise of something, they actually have the noise of something happening, or they actually have their hair being blown by the wind instead of it
Because
just
even if
being a
you're
pretend
really,
thing.
because even if you're a really good actor, it still is, it still comes off really fake or really forced more often than not when you're trying to mimic those kinds of scenes. Because our brain tends to, like, since we don't have the exact sound, we tend to overdo it because we imagine the sound instead of actually hearing it and trying to speak above it. Does that
Mhm.
make sense?
Yeah, especially if you don't need it, if there's nothing there. The way I think about it is like a club scene where they're supposed to be yelling to each other over music that's really loud, but they don't actually have the music there. And nobody in the club is actually talking. They're all just, pretending to talk in the background so that you can pick up the main actor's dialogue. And so they either overdo it or they don't do it. They're not loud enough to where it's like, how are they hearing each other over this music? So it's definitely a lot easier when you can give them something to work off of, which is where practical effects come in. Something like that. You can't
Even
really
if,
do something like that and with the sound unless you were going to do ADR in post production, which they try not to. So
I
with
was gonna
something
say,
like that, it's a lot harder to get. Go ahead.
oh sorry, I was just gonna say, I feel like even if you do a scenario where you would have it super loud, realistically, how it would really sound, and then you go in ADR, but you have it on the headset, for example. Let's say you have the noise in the headset and you're in the booth, and the actor is saying the lines into the mic. So the sound is still in his ears, but you can still get the crisp sound. You can still get the clear sound with him still, or her still hearing the voice, hearing the noise, sorry. I feel like
For
that would be a good
ADR.
technique. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, sort of, but they want to try to capture it all on set so that they don't need the actors for ADR if they can help it, usually, unless like the location just didn't have good sound anyway.
No, but I'm just saying that I feel like that would be a really good technique as well. If you're shooting a very loud scene, let's say, like an action scene with a lot of things going on, like in the X-Men scenario where he's like running and there's like a bunch of sounds and they couldn't get his breathing and he couldn't get his noises because he was running around in the street. And
Because
so
it's
he had to
outside,
do
yeah.
the ADR again.
Mhm.
I feel like in that kind of scenario, it might be a good strategy to have those, have like the actor have a headset with those sounds in his ear, and then just make the noises or the lines that he would say in that scenario like that and record it like that because they'd still have this the noise in their ears.
Well, again, they try to get it on set, and if they get it on set and they feel like it's good enough, they just go ahead and leave it.
I know, I'm just saying that would be a good strategy if there's way too much going on and they have to do ADR.
Yeah, yeah. But the point is, like, the point of that was that practically it will look better, it'll come out better because they'll actually be screaming over music. But they don't do that on set because they want to try to get the sound right on set, usually. I know what you mean, but I'm just saying, like, they don't actually have all those sounds going on. Those are added to post production.
I know that, but I know that there are also some sounds that are going on and that later are enhanced.
Mainly, it's just the dialogue in those club scenes, unless it's like
I'm
the
talking
sound of
about
a
like
cup.
if you're doing an outdoor scene, if you're doing a scene in a busy city,
Oh, then yeah, you have to ADR the whole thing.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Okay. All right, so now this stuff comes from lafilm.edu. It is letter K in the syllabus. CGI and practical effects are both tools. They're only as good as the professionals crafting with them. Any type of effect should never be used to cover what is otherwise a bad plot, unprofessional production or editing, or any other weaknesses demonstrated by your project. So they're basically saying, don't try to cover up crap with CGI and practical effects. Enhance stuff. Don't just, oh, we'll fix it later, or this will really fix it. Make sure that it's, a good plot. Make sure that if something's not working with the story, you aren't trying to fix it by adding an explosion or by adding some other kind of visual effect, but you're going in and figuring out why the story element's not working and change it, because the story is the first thing that people are going to pay attention to. And then the visual effects and stuff can be on top of that, or the practical effects, making it better, but they shouldn't be in place of a bad plot. And unprofessional production, meaning just not doing the correct procedures and things like that. And then unprofessional editing, meaning they're not trying to edit around things and they're just kind of sloppily throwing it together. Every project is different, so don't be opposed to doing wholly practical, wholly digital, or a mixture of the two for each project. Everything won't always work for every project. Something that works for one might not work for another, because the lighting might be different. The actor might have trouble with wholly digital CGI pretending to have a character next to them, so they might need something to work off of. Any other examples? A wholly practical effect might not look as realistic on one set as it does for another, because maybe the person making it doesn't know how to do animatronics as well, or maybe it's not working for what it's supposed to be, because now you need a human instead of a creature. A creature is a lot easier to do than a human. So now going with a mixture of CGI and practical, or going wholly with digital CGI, will be the better choice. So don't be opposed to one or the other, or a mixture of both with each project. Just go with whatever works best for the project that you are currently working on. And of course, the budget.
Like we had the discussion last week, or sorry, the week before, when we were talking about like practical versus CGI a lot of the time, and how at the end of the day it came, in our opinions, the conclusion we had was that it came down mostly to practicality, and like timing, like pre-production and that kind of thing. I do think that a lot of people's first instinct is to go CGI nowadays. And yes, that there are pros, a lot of pros to it, but I also feel like there's a lot of pros to practical effects, and there's a lot of creativity and fun that it brings that isn't people's first choice, or doesn't come to mind as much because they're afraid of the pre-production, or they're afraid of like, oh, how many people are we going to need for this, or is this going to be hard to build as opposed to being on a computer. Sometimes it can, well, more often than not, I would imagine, I might be wrong, but from what I've seen, practical effects are a lot of the time cheaper than using CGI, depending on what you're doing. And it might not be like what you had in mind, but that doesn't mean it's bad. And also sometimes CGI, depending on what you're using, looks complete crap and looks worse than if you would have used practical or a mix of the two. But because people are so set in using CGI and a complete CGI because it's easier or simpler, or like, oh, you have more creative control, they end up not thinking about that as an option, or thinking of mixing the two as much.
Yeah, and I definitely agree. So I think that LAfilm.edu put it really well when they're saying like, just go with whatever's best for the project, because just because you like CGI, just because that's your go-to choice, doesn't mean it's going to work for everything, or that you should try to force it into everything. Just like if you like practical effects, that doesn't mean you should go with practical effects for every single shot that needs effects. Sometimes CGI is going to be better, or sometimes, again, the mixture of the two is going to be the best choice. So just go with whatever works best, and hopefully you get a production designer that can help work you through which one's going to be the right one for your budget and the right one for your project.
At the end of the day, I feel like we need to not be so afraid of. I just feel like nowadays we're trying so hard to be efficient as possible, and that's important. But I feel like a lot of productions nowadays are not being as utilizing creativity as much as they could or as much as they should. They're taking the easy way out or the quicker way out, and it's looking more sloppy, honestly, in a lot of productions, especially like I was talking to Kodo the other day about how Disney is in a lot of hot water right now with their CGI team, because they're trying to pump out all these projects and they're not giving their department enough time to actually perfect everything. And it's looking incredibly sloppy. It's looking like some green screen YouTube video. So in a lot of like really big budget movies. And sometimes we understand as creators that we only have so much money and we only have so much time, especially as independent creators. We try to utilize as much as we can our time and our resources. But I feel like this industry is also about creativity and also about thinking outside the box. And those are the things that revolutionized the industry and got us to where we are now. So I feel like we should go into projects with that in mind as well. Let's try to be creative. Let's try to find ways around it. Let's try to find new, creative, fun, cost effective as well, and time efficient, but also like, what can we do? Let's not just go straight into, okay, what's cheapest, or okay, what's quicker, or okay, what's more expensive, but it'll get us done faster, you know? Am I making sense? I don't know. I might be on a tangent here.
So yeah, somewhat. I would say just for every project, make sure that there's no, oh, we can't get this done because we don't have the time for it, or oh, we can't get this done because we don't have the money for it. Realistically, yes, there are definitely going to be those times where it's like you want this giant set piece that can't be done because you don't have the budget for it. But other times, the best teams are always the ones who go, all right, how can we get this done with the budget that we have?
And there's no one size fits all either. Like, just because one thing worked for one project, that doesn't mean it'll work for the other project, and that same system will work for every project you make. Like, be open to changes, to adapting.
That's what LA Film said.
Huh?
So yeah, that's what I read twice. LA Film said that.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I get a little repetitive when I'm trying to like figure out what I'm trying to say.
No, I got you.
I am
Also from LA Film, in the syllabus there are, well, this isn't from LA Film, but I just wanted to add that in the syllabus there are some videos and websites showing how some larger productions use practical effects well in their film, and I definitely recommend checking them out. I had a lot of fun watching through them. It's a lot of the videos like Practical Effects 101, letter A, letter B, letter C. Priscilla sent a bunch in the WhatsApp, but we didn't send them through email, but they're in the syllabus, and it just shows like how these very large productions use practical effects with a mixture of digital effects sometimes to get some of those really cool shots done that would otherwise maybe not look as good or just wouldn't be as interesting, I guess. I find it interesting when they do practical effects because it's just really cool to see compared to like CGI. CGI is really cool to see and everything when it's finally done, but the process of it isn't as, I think, like Priscilla was saying, isn't as creatively inspiring as practical effects, because practical effects that are done and actually look really good and hold up.
You're requires you to use a lot more of your,
There's a lot more creativity that has to go into it, I feel like, because there's a lot more skill sets that need to be done. You know, you need to have somebody who can artistically make a miniature or can figure out how to set up something that's going to make it look like the thing flooded or there's a dam breaking or
obviously not saying that people who work with CGI don't have like creativity or,
no, of course not, but they have that one skill set of making it like that, and then they have the, you know, mathematician guys and stuff that work out the numbers of how everything will work, and it's a little bit more technologically savvy rather than artistically savvy. I'd say it's a little bit of mixture of both, of course.
more often than not, you will have either pre-made templates or you will have programs to help you. You have a lot more assistance and a lot of things that might make it easier, simpler in some cases. For you to have more room for error, of course, because you can just delete it and start over, or you can just go back to the base and stuff like that. So I feel like with practical, it's a lot more of like, okay, we have to think a lot more. We have to use a lot more of our ingenuity and what we have and the resources. But like we said, we're not saying that one is necessarily better than the other at all. We're just saying that they're very different and they have pros and cons to both, and things that can be more fulfilling in some aspects than others.
There's a reason that large productions still utilize practical effects when possible, even for big set pieces sometimes. And it's because they hold up really well if they're done well. Just like CGI can hold up really well if it's done well and given the time needed. And like Priscilla was saying, the problem with CGI now, right now, is that a lot of studios and a lot of companies aren't giving their CGI artists enough time to get it to look right. So it looks kind of crappy. And that's mainly because of lighting and other like little slight movements and these little tiny things that you only notice when it's not there, but you don't notice when it is. Same thing with practical effects, but
and like we say a million times, it's also partially because people in these industries don't understand how the other people working in other departments of their industry, how their work is, what it entails, how much work it actually takes. I'm sure a lot of those people think, oh, it's easy, right? You just go on the computer, there's a program, you make some buildings, you're done. Like, how hard can it be? And when really it's a lot of work, it's a lot of ingenuity. It's people go to like multiple years of college for that, you know? So that's another case too, and that's why we always talk about how it's important for us to understand a little bit of each aspect of the industry, because that way we can also be better and more efficient when it comes to, be it making our own productions or helping in other productions, working in other productions, because we understand just how much work and dedication goes into each aspect of it.
yeah, so I'm totally not like saying CGI is bad. Like I said, use it when you want to, use it when you can. I just find it interesting whenever somebody pulls off what looks to be a visual effect practically, because it shows that they put a lot of effort into it. Not saying CGI doesn't have effort and all of that. So hopefully I'm not coming off as saying that CGI art is bad or worse than practical. I just think it's really interesting when practical effects can look like it's a visual effect and hold up for years later.
Basically, it's like, holy crap, you did this with your hands and out of things you had. That's
like, oh wow, this thing that looks like a rock is really just some foam. Like,
that's crazy.
So, yeah. Does anyone have anything to add or any questions about special effects or practical effects and production design? All right, moving on from that, we're talking about creating weather in film. And we already talked about some of this stuff in previous semesters. So some of it's a little recappy, but others is like stuff that we didn't really talk about. It's just how to get different weather elements on set, how productions usually go about doing it. This stuff comes from Insider. It's letter A in the syllabus. It's how 8 extreme weather scenes were made for movies. So to create earthquakes, sometimes like in this picture, they'll put it on a platform like I was talking about earlier, where it's kind of like on these hydraulic lifts that physically shake the set. If you've ever been to an amusement park where you sit in the chair and you're acting like you're going through a spaceship, or you're going on a train, or there's something happening and the thing is shaking underneath you, it's the same technique. They put it on something that is going to have a platform on a giant machine that is able to move it up and down with hydraulic lifts to make it feel like it's rumbling and moving around like an earthquake. And they, as well, they might cut or pre-cut different pieces that break apart during the earthquake. So you might have a giant cut in the middle of this thing where the fence is, and there's a machine underneath that's going to either pull it down or it's going to lift it up each side so that it looks like the parts are breaking apart, that they're separating, when in reality it's just part of a machine. So those can be done, and that's often how they get earthquakes done if they're doing it practically and realistically. To help sell the effect, like I mentioned earlier as well, with practical effects, they may use environmental manipulation on items and things that are attached to either remote controlled machines, making it appear as though like cars or chandeliers are shaking back and forth, depending on what their set is. So they might have that tree, or it might be a fake tree that's on a platform of its own, and that way they can make it shake or fall down or do something like it would realistically in some kind of earthquake scenario. And they might have a car on its own machine that's going to lift one side and then the other. It's going to lift the left side and the right side back and forth, so it looks like the car is shaking whenever the earthquake is happening. And if you're indoors, like I was saying before, they might do like a picture that moves back and forth, some stuff on the walls, some stuff on a shelf that moves, just different things that are actually just part of a machine that's moving it remotely. For a flood or some kind of giant water disaster, I guess it would still be a flood. It's usually a combination of using either miniatures and shooting live shots with the miniatures, or it is using massive water tank set pieces, as well as CGI and visual effects. And so as you can see, it's something kind of like this. Depending on how big the set needs to be, will depend on how big the water tank is. The water tank, whenever people are like getting ready to drown on scene, it's usually like maybe 3 to 4 feet deep. That way if anybody's having any trouble, they can just stand up. And they like get down on their knees or something, or just crouch down to look like they are swimming in a deep pool of water. And it's deep enough to where the light's not going to reflect off the ground and show that it's actually 3 feet deep. And then they usually have green screen around it so that they can expand the set, making it look like an ocean or a lake or whatever the body of water is, a river, something like that. There's often, whenever it's like a tsunami or it's a giant flood or something, they have big machines that pump water, making huge waves that are artificial waves. Well, it's artificial the way the waves are being made, but then the water is actually carrying it as a wave would, going from one side to the other so that it looks like all the water is being shoved or pulled toward one direction. For any rain, it's often these big custom-made machines with those rain towers on top, kind of like sprinkler heads, and gallons of water that get pumped through either something like those water tanks like we just saw, or it'll be a large liquid carrying rain truck like this, where they connect the hose to something that connects to the sprinkler heads, and then they pump it on and off whenever they need. I've seen other sets that use fire hydrants, but you have to get like special clearances and stuff like that to be able to use those. So sometimes they just go with water tanks I mean, sorry, water tanks like this, but it won't have any people or set pieces in it, obviously. It'll just be like a giant pool. Or they'll have the rain trucks, especially depending on how remote the place is and if it's not near an actual fire hydrant. A fire hydrant, if you're using that on set, it's going to be very expensive because you also have to shut down part of the city or wherever you're at, the town, the city, because there's not just going to be a fire hydrant in the middle of nowhere. So there's also that to take into account. So those can be very expensive depending on what you're doing. And then obviously they have like these giant cranes that usually hold up the sprinklers. So it's you need like that big heavy machinery if you're going to have something look like it's coming from very high up as well. For smaller productions and independent productions that only need like a small area or maybe like just a window to get rained on, they usually can just use a hose and some PVC pipe and then pump the water through there through a regular hose. With rain in film, it's usually backlit. So you usually light the back of the rain to make it be visible on camera. And with snow, if you're using any kind of snow, it's usually lit from the front. And it's done that way because it just appears in camera a lot better. It's easier to see. If you don't backlight the rain or the water droplets, it's very hard to see in camera, even if it actually is raining. So films will often use backlighting so that it enhances the shape of the rain and makes it easier to see. And there's also some sets that will add some kind of white coloring or something kind of like milk, something that's a little bit easier to see in camera than clear water. And then they'll backlight that depending on how much it needs to be seen. For tornadoes and hurricanes or massive windstorms, large wind blowers and fans are used to blow air across the entire set. So it's just these massive fans that are plugged in somewhere that's blowing across the set or blowing as close to whatever subject they need it to be. For snowstorms, they use a mixture of fans, snow machines, digital effects, snow blankets, and other practical elements are combined to create the effect, like paper flakes, which is basically just paper that's cut out to be very unique shapes if they need to do something close to camera or have it be very unique design of the snowflake. Shredded paper to just look like clumps of snow somewhere. Shredded plastic. And those can be delivered through those blowers to get it to shoot out further. So it doesn't always have to be ice and actual snow. It can sometimes just be the fake stuff to pump it out, get it everywhere. Oh yeah, through the blowers like that. So it could be real snow or it could just be stuff that they're putting in it that pumps it out. It's kind of like a leaf blower, but for snow. And then just put whatever they need, whatever snow element they want to make it look like snow into that machine, and it blows it out with however much pressure they need it to. For fog and haze, there are specific machines for that. We've gone over that before. For any created weather, fog, haze, you can use a haze machine or a fog machine to get those elements done, and those are done before you start shooting, like right before, and then the shot is done, and then if it starts to dissipate, more is added again for the next shot. For any created weather, it's important to use plastic shields, bags, and other protection for your equipment to keep it all safe from those elements, especially if you're using anything like water, because water and wind, because that can really start to damage lenses and cameras and other pieces of equipment and gear on the set. Another thing to keep in mind whenever using any kind of weather elements, especially if you're using large fans, is the noise that they make. So there are large fans that are made specifically for film where they try to be as quiet as possible, but that doesn't mean they're going to be completely silent. So you also have to take that into account whenever you're thinking of doing something with those big giant fans or the wind machines or the snow blowers or any of that stuff that's a machine that's going to be doing something very intense. It's going to make quite a bit of noise most of the time. So you're probably going to have to ADR the dialogue in post-production. So just keep that in mind. You might already have to do that if you're outside anyway, but it's just something to keep in mind because there's so much stuff going on that it's going to make noise and it's going to be loud and it's going to be not the scene that you're looking for most of the time. Does anyone have anything to add or questions or comments about creating weather for film?
Yeah, sorry. So because you just said ADR, what is?
Okay, so that's a audio. That's oh crap. What's the actual term for it? Audio dialogue replacement. And that's when in on set you shoot the audio. Usually you record the dialogue and everything. But if it doesn't turn out well, if it was like a noisy city or something like that, in post-production, they will re-record the audio. They'll get the actor to come back. They'll use the same mics and they'll try to set up the scene a little bit the same way, but it'll be in a controlled studio. So they're trying to re-record it exactly on the spot that the actor did their lines first. So they'll watch the scene over and over again, and then they will repeat their lines until they get it spot on.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's just basically because there's so much noise from the fans and things like that, you're not going to get clean audio on set. And so you'll most likely have to go into post-production doing the ADR, like re-recording the dialogue again with the actor later, watching their scene and making sure they try to match up their performance.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
It makes a lot of
automated dialogue replacement. Sorry, that's what.
Okay. No,
I was like, it was bugging me because I was like, it's not audio dialogue.
Close.
Automated dialogue replacement. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's basically just re-recording the sound on that you did on set because the on-set sound does not sound good.
Now, sorry to interrupt again. Now, do you have a person that's in charge of that?
It depends on your set. Yeah, you would normally if you have somebody over ADR in post-production. But if your set's small and you don't have the budget for it, then either your post-production sound person or you, if you're over the producing side of it, will have to take over. It just depends.
Either way, the director will probably be there as well to direct your scene.
Yeah, the director would. It's not always, but it is beneficial to have the director there because they can try to get the performance out of the actor again if the actor is having trouble with it, because it is a very different feeling from being on set.
Yeah, we have a whole. Was it last semester or the semester before that we talked about this? I
think it was like two semesters ago.
Yeah, if you scroll down on the YouTube channel, the videos with the rest of the Zoom meetings, there is one that we did solely on ADR.
Okay.
Yeah, we even did an exercise on ADR for it.
And all that kind of thing.
All right. But yeah, don't feel free to keep asking questions if I say anything you don't know. Well, you're cutting out a lot.
Connecting. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I went to take out the trash. That's why I was like, oh, I'm dying.
Okay.
But yeah, feel free to ask. Sorry. Dang it, what'd I do? Honey.
You're good, go ahead.
I did my camera by accident again.
No, you're not.
I'm not, I can see it.
No.
Oh. I pressed something and my camera showed. Anyway, feel free to ask, Gabe. We're just meaning that like if you have more questions, we did like whole video discussions about it, and that might be more beneficial for you and to help you understand a little better than us just like quickly explaining it, giving a
Right.
quick summary.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, basically, like if you want to look further into it, we also have more on it. And if you want the old syllabus, I can also give that to you.
Oh, yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
All right, so moving on from that, the next thing we're talking about is Greensman and greenery. So this stuff comes from entertainment.howstuffworks.com. It is letter D in the syllabus. Unless a shot is filmed outside using nothing but the location's actual natural nature elements, every tree, bush, flower, vine, and plant you see in the movie is actually rented. There are warehouses that rent out plants and foliage, both real and artificial. It's something like this, kind of like giant greenhouses that are specific to film, depending on where you're at. They have a bunch of them just for film. If you're close to one of the big filming cities, filming hubs, especially, there will be a bunch of these.
Especially if you're looking for like specific trees that only have in one area of the country, so that you don't have to
Or in
fly all
other
the way there,
countries that you're
or in
not
other
even,
countries, yeah.
yeah. Plants that might originate in Japan and you're doing a Japanese based film, you might need a bunch of that kind of foliage. So you go to one of these rental houses. Well, you send your greensman there to do this. And they rent out the plants that would be in that area at the time of your story. But they're both real. A lot of them are real, but there's also, they create artificial ones. Same way you would create an artificial prop or something like that. Making it look like as realistic as possible to a real plant, but it's artificial. But the greensman is the crew member responsible for renting, replanting, arranging, taking care of, and returning all of the plants that are used on the set. So they have to make sure it's going to be able to be returned in the condition that they rented it with, and that it's not going to get damaged or ruined on set during the production. Most of a greensman's work is done on a sound stage. So something like this, you can see the lights and the wall in the background in the top of the picture. So it's a sound stage. It's like a just a place that they're renting it out, and they're trying to make it look like it's outside. It could be a backyard, a jungle, a forest, and it's all just on a concrete floor with walls and
Sound
studio lights
stages can
on.
also just be the places where they film scenes in general, but they will do these kinds of shots and these kinds of setups in sound stages.
Yes.
Because like sitcoms are shot on sound stages and stuff like that as well. So.
Yeah, and so a lot of the greensman's work will be done on a soundstage, creating what appears to be outdoor scene when in reality it's inside. Greensmen aren't needed as often for outdoor locations for obvious reasons, because there's actual plants and greenery out there. So they aren't needed as often, but sometimes they'll still be called in to augment and enhance a location's existing greenery. So maybe they want to shoot outside at a park, but the park doesn't have too many trees, or the scene calls for bushes. So they have a greensman come in to add bushes or add more trees to the area that they're going to be filming in. That way it matches what the director had in mind. Greensman works under the production designer and is often part of the art department. But from other sources, they say that they can also fall under the construction department, which ultimately falls under the art department in most productions. So I would say basically they're under the art department, but they can be categorized in one or the other depending on what the production is and how they set up their hierarchy, basically. They work really closely with the production designer, the set decorator, and the special effects team to realize the director's vision for the movie's natural environment. Greensmen need to do a lot of research, figuring out what vegetation will be needed for each scene based on the time and area of the story, as well as what has happened in or around the area in the script. So maybe in the script, there was recently a flood, or a flood is going to be happening, or there was recently a fire, or there's some strange radioactivity happening nearby the site. So they might choose to get these plants that look, or that hold up against a flood, or that they might make the earth around the plants scorched and looked like it recently had a fire that spread out but didn't fully take down the plants. Or they might get larger plants than would realistically be in that area if it's supposed to be like a radioactive site, that, you know, stuff just keeps growing around that area and it's making everything act unnaturally to how it normally would. So they'll also take into account what is happening in the script to figure out what kind of plants to get, and what kind of foliage to get for that location. The production designer often provides sketches for the greensmen, who will then go work to get the rentals, to get like what the production designer had in mind. If there were outdoor shots and now they're doing pickups, or they're doing reshoots, or continuations are needed of those same shots, a greensman is often called upon to replicate the scene's greenery for continuity. So if they did an outdoor scene and now they can't go back to that location, but they need to do a quick shot or two picking up a few lines that, you know, something went wrong, the camera wasn't working right, or the sound didn't work properly and they need it, or the performance wasn't good enough for the director, in post-production they see it's not matching, then they'll go and do a pickup of a few lines of the scene. Or if they need to do a full reshoot but they can't get the location, so they have to do the whole scene over, but they can't get the same location that they had before, then a greensman will be called in to basically go on the soundstage and recreate the scene. They'll look at the pictures, they'll look at the shots and the video of the scene and recreate it the best they can to keep it with the continuity, so that it doesn't, the background, you know, all the trees and stuff doesn't just change around when we're cutting from the real shots that they shot first to the shots they shot later in the soundstage. It'll all blend together and look like it's coming from the same place, even though realistically it's coming from two locations. The greensman's job is very labor intensive, and on many productions, there may only be one person doing it. On large budget productions, there may be up to 3. So there's still not too many of them. There's only about 3 or less. So they might be the only ones having to haul the trees around, digging a lot of holes to plant all of the different plants and foliage.
Yeah, I was gonna say, when you think about, 3 people for plants, that seems like a lot. But when you actually think about what they're doing, they're creating an entire set, but with plants, but they have to put all this detail and they have to make sure that all the plants look natural and look realistic, and make sure that they are like fitted properly. It's a lot of work when you think about it.
Yeah, it's a lot of labor because you're pulling around trees. So it might not be the giant, massive trees that are outside, but it's still, you know, pretty heavy trees and plants and bushes and things that are pointy and pokey and get everywhere and are messy. And you have to make sure they're getting watered and taken care of so that they're not going to turn brown whenever you try to turn them back to the rental place, because then they won't accept it and you'll have to pay the full price. So they have to take care of it too. Watering the flowers, moving plants on set.
Holy crap, that too. Like, anyone that's had plants knows how hard it is to take care of like 1 or 2 plants, let alone an entire like set forest.
Yeah.
I can imagine it's crazy.
Yeah, and they could be doing that for weeks on end, depending on how long they need that set, that scene, that production aspect. And they could be creating a scene a whole set that's just needed for 1 or 2 shots. And then, or like, a 30 seconds of film. And then they go on and they make a new scene. The next scene's needed, and it's also outside, but a different location. So,
And then they also have to be in charge of not only bringing it there, setting it up, taking care of it, but also bringing it back.
yep. So
Yeah,
the greensman
wow.
is often one of the first people to arrive on set to ensure that the greenery is correctly set up and that nothing has been changed, moved around, or none of the plants are like dying or look different. So they'll be one of the first people on set, along with like the production designer and others who come first to check on their own things. They also need to watch rehearsals and adjust the plants as necessary. So we're on a sound stage and they're all camping and they think that they're talking about Bigfoot or they're talking about some creature that lives around the area, and then somebody's going to pop out of the bushes. They need to watch the rehearsals and see where they're going to pop out, where they want to move and walk around at, so that they can adjust where the plants actually are, to hide the person for one, and to make sure they're not going to step all over them and actually ruin the plants for two.
And that's what I was about to say. You also have to, I forgot the exact term, but make a note of where the actors are going to be the entire time, of where their position's going to be.
Blocking.
Blocking, yes. You have to make sure that you know and how the blocking of the actors is going to be, so that when you do set it up, you make sure to leave enough room for the actors to move around. You have to know in the script, okay, how are they going to move around? How far are they going to walk? How much space do I need to, like walking space, do I need to free up around it? Are they going to interact with any of the plants? If so, like, I have to make sure that that plant is not easily like ruined, or that is in a clear enough, like open enough space to where they can interact with the plant without damaging any of the other plants, and all of that too.
Yeah.
So they have to know some knowledge of the script as well.
Yeah, definitely. And that's just like everyone else that's doing anything with the art department. They usually have to read the script, see what their elements are, and make sure that they have their responsibilities covered. And they'll meet with other people of the art department and the director and everything to make sure that what they have in mind is what the director has in mind, and with the producer to make sure that the producers knows what everyone's budget is and that everybody's under their budget or following their budget. A greensman doesn't often work every single day of the shoot because they're not always going to be needed depending on what the shoot calls for. They might be there for this scene, the camping scene or whatever this would be, and then or the hiking scene, let's say. And then the next scene is something indoors or something in a city. And so obviously the greensmen won't really be needed in that aspect, and they won't be working that day or forever, however many days the next scene is happening, until the next scene that calls for more greenery to be put in. So sometimes a greensman might only work a few days on the whole entire feature film, and that'll be all they do because the rest of their shots are going to be outdoors, and they choose not to have a greensman come in to do anything to the area. They just want it for the one indoor scene, that kind of stuff. For outdoor shoots, if they are brought in, a greensman is also responsible for set safety, making sure that none of the plants, bushes, or trees could cause injury to the cast or crew. So they make sure that there's no trees that are leaning or that look like they're getting uprooted, and that if an actor comes over to it and needs to climb needs to start climbing the trunk, that it's not just going to fall over on them and they're going to get hurt.
Also making sure, I would imagine, that nothing is poisonous or causes any allergic reactions to the actors as well.
Yeah,
So you
I
have
would,
to have
yeah.
a
And I would also
basic knowledge of
imagine that
allergies.
they have to make sure that the actual plants are being taken care of and left the way that they were originally, so that they're not destroying the land as they film. So I'm pretty sure they do set safety in those aspects, and also for the plants to make sure
So
that
they would be
aren't ruining
directly in charge of negotiating with the people that work in those greeneries and stuff like that, correct? Like they would be
Yes, they'd be in charge of like going to the actual warehouses and talking to people and getting the best deals they can. So hopefully they have relationships with those people so that they are on good terms and can get a good
So,
deal.
so how does damage, how are damages resolved? Like, is there a type of insurance?
I am not sure, but
Because I
it
couldn't
might be
find
if you
that.
damage it, you pay the whole price, or it might be
But that would be on the
might be some
crew, I would
insurance.
imagine, right? Not on the person procuring the plants.
It wouldn't be on the person procuring the plants, but it'd be on the production most likely, not the crew.
Right, but like his responsibility is only to a certain degree. His or her responsibility is only to a certain degree.
Right. Like if somebody comes in drunk and, lights a smoke and throws it into the bushes and it catches everything on fire, that's not really the greensman's responsibility.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure because while I was looking at that, I didn't see anything about insurance, and
Yeah.
I don't know if I just missed it or.
I didn't see anything on it, but I would assume it's probably mixed in with some of the other production insurance. Either that or you just pay full price if you damage it or it comes back burned or something.
Okay. But his responsibilities are solely to take care of it as far as like making sure that it's healthy and that it's in place properly. And not that if there's any misuse of the actor, that's not his responsibility. He did his part. They
Right.
did their part.
Yeah. And then, so their main job is to make sure it looks realistic, it's set up the way it should, and that it's taken care of so that they can bring it back to the original place without it being dead at the end.
Yeah.
Pretty much. On lower budget productions, the set decorator takes on the responsibilities of the greensman. So if you don't have a greensman, the set decorator is the next one to take that responsibility into their hands. Greensmen should know.
I was also going to say, for a smaller production that can't afford to, go to those specific companies or that don't have any near them, I also did see some people talking about places where you can get very realistic looking plants, like different websites, different brands on Amazon, that kind of thing. And obviously that wouldn't work for every single set, but depending on what you're going for, that's also an option for like small creators and stuff like that.
Yeah, because artificial plants can look very realistic. I would say it just depends on how much interaction with that plant there's going to be and how much in focus in the depth of field it's going to be, or if it's going to be in the background out of focus, would determine whether you need like the real plants or the fake or a mixture.
Yeah. But that
Greensman
could
should
also
know.
be a huge cut in budget and also a great way of like saving costs. And if you are in a place where you don't have access to those greeneries or the budget for it.
Possibly, I don't know. I'm curious what the cost is compared to buying a artificial plant to renting a real one.
No, yeah, I just mean that not every city, not every state has those places. And sometimes, especially with shipping right now, with how expensive everything is, for you to ship over those realistic plants, it might be interesting to look up the difference and see which one is more cost effective, and if you are able to get the same results.
Yeah, definitely. All right, greensmen should know botany, which is like the different parts of the plants, how they all work, of course, so that way they can take care of them properly and make sure they're not pulling out the roots as they are digging them up, because they need to dig around the roots to make sure it's still going to be able to be alive at the end. They also need to know, landscape design. That way they can set up the scene to look realistic and look pretty, look the best it can be, or look the worst it can be if that's intentional, depending on what they're doing. If they're trying to make like a weird jungle area and they're just kind of having plants overgrown over all of the houses, and maybe it's an abandoned place, then they might want to make it look really ugly and really overgrown, or they might want to make it look very fancy and very elegant and like it's been taken care of by a professional gardener for years. And so depending on that type of stuff, they need to know how they might set that up and how the landscape design would be. for parks and stuff like that too, of course. And then they need to know, I believe it's called horticulture, and it's the culture of plants for food, comfort, and beautification. Field of science that deals with cultivation of horticultural plants. It's basically just like gardening, I think, is what it is.
It's a lot more than gardening. It's also understanding like the purpose of each plant, how to grow them, how they work in nature, crops, that kind of thing. It
Okay.
goes from everything from like plants to crops and that kind of thing.
Yeah, so basically they need to know a lot about plants, how they work, how they function, and how they would look if they were grown naturally or if they were grown in a garden or something like that, so that they can set up those scenes and make it look realistic to how it would be. They also need to know the different kinds of plants, how to care for them, because the different ones will be different. They'll need different things, different amounts of water, of course, based on their size and their species of plant and flower and all of that. They need to know how to grow them. They need to know how to plant and replant them, of course.
How much sunlight each plant will need as well. Like some need more, some need less.
Yeah, and
what
if they
kind
even
of-
need sunlight, if it's something like mushrooms that grow in a cave, then they need to know how to take care of them differently.
What kind of soil as well? That is very important. Like if you specific types of soil are good for planting some things and others are not. So that's another thing.
Like Priscilla said earlier, they need to know the poisonous plants so they can look out for them, make sure they're not going to have the actor step in poison ivy or something that could give them a rash or kill them if they touch it or eat it. Or just like, a rose thorn. They need to make sure that they know all those things so it's not going to damage the actors or damage any of the other plants as well.
I would imagine you'd also have to have a knowledge of the actors that you're working with if they have any allergies to any specific food or plant type of situation as well.
Mm-hmm. And they also need to be able to research the kinds of plants that fit each scene, as well as which plants most closely resemble each other. So that way, in case one isn't available, they know the next best thing that's going to look not the exact same, but as close as possible to what they were going for originally. And this next stuff comes from practicaladultinsights.com, letter E in the syllabus. And it is greensmen are also known as greenskeepers. They may also be responsible for setting up rocks, whether it be real or artificial, involved in a garden or stones that line a park's walkway. They might also be in charge of handling sand for a beach scene or gravel for a gravel road or anything that uses gravel, like maybe a gravel backyard. Sometimes they are needed to what is called green out a spot, or basically camouflaging an unwanted location. So maybe in the scene, we make a big bush here because we don't want to see the city in the background. So if we have a wall and then we have a bush over it, now we can shoot here without seeing that city, as long as we position the camera correctly. So they might be called in to, green out that background by putting a natural element that looks like it belongs there, that will also block out something that they don't want to be seen. They do this also maybe like with a tree in a certain scene in a certain area to block out logos and things like that in background buildings. That way there's no copyright or trademark infringement. And then in a neighborhood, they might do this to block out the houses or block out something in different areas. Basically, it's just to make it look like it's a natural place, natural element, and not give away that it's actually a location, something in the background that they don't want to have shown. A greensman may also be in charge of sculpting bushes and hedges for certain scenes, or creating artificial greenery specifically for the film or a scene. So they might be in charge of creating the plant. And some greensmen, like this guy on the right, he was in one of the videos in the syllabus, created this weed plant. I think it was for TED 2. And he has this warehouse where he actually created them. And basically just make it as realistic as possible. So you need to know what the plant looks like and what it kind of feels like and how it reacts, and then try to make it with different fabrics and different materials to make sure that it matches as closely to the realistic plant as possible. And so they need to know how to they need to know how to create things like that, basically like creating props, but specifically for plants. And this last stuff comes from Georgia box office. It's letter C in the syllabus, working as a production designer with Brian McBrien. Oh, that's that guy, Brian McBrien. He says that Greensmen are technically under construction department, like I said earlier, but they still fall under the art department. So they are kind of in the middle. And depending on the set, the production, they might put them in one or the other. They might categorize them differently. As with most roles, it probably depends production to production, who they answer to and how the hierarchy is set up. Since they can count as both art and construction usually falls under the art department. So it really depends on the production and how they want to set it up. Either way, whatever production they're on, they're going to answer to someone, whether it be the director, the production designer, or somebody else, to make sure that every plant they're getting and the costs that they are, the budget that they need are approved so that they can help create the director's vision. Does anyone have any questions, comments, or anything to add about greensmen and greenery and film? So this is just another thing that you have to keep in mind if you are trying to shoot an outdoor scene indoors, or if you are trying to have a very specific scene in your mind of how it's going to look. To accomplish this, you'll have to use, if it's like an outdoor scene that you have a very specific scene in your mind, you'll to get it to look like it does in your mind, you usually have to have a greensman or have the set decorator take over for the greensman and rent out these plants to set it up exactly as you envisioned it. And that can cost a lot of money. So you have to keep that in mind whenever you are thinking about these scenes and the budget of your overall production. All right, last thing we're talking about today is self-distribution. This stuff comes from nyfa.edu. It's letter U in the syllabus underneath self-distribution. So right here. It is extremely hard to get a film out to the masses. There's a reason there's a huge industry dedicated entirely to distribution and marketing. Doing it on your own is nearly impossible. However, with technology improving and decentralization of the internet, more artists are turning towards self-distribution. It's much easier to self-distribute if you have a built-in audience. If no one has ever heard of you, you're in for a serious undertaking. First thing that they say to do is get attention. Hire an artist to share your vision, creating a poster, some flyers, and more that catches the eye while also conveying the tone, mood, and/or theme of your project. Also hire an editor to make sure they have a good trailer that does the same thing. It catches the eye, but it also demonstrates the actual project and conveys the tone. Distribution, even self-distribution, is expensive depending on your budget it could actually cost more than the film itself. It's very expensive to get word out to people and to distribute, and all these materials that are needed to actually distribute. So sometimes for the very cheap independent projects, self-distribution ends up costing more than the actual budget of the film as a whole.
That's also why a lot of films don't account for distribution in their total cost, because it's a completely different cost. Obviously, it's part of the overall cost of the production, but they don't count for it when stating like, oh, it costs this much. They almost always separate distribution because of that, because it's a huge cost. It's more often than not delegated to a specific department or a specific company.
Yeah, for the big movies, if you go to Wikipedia and they say they had a budget of 100 million, they really had a budget of like 100 to 150 million, because around 50% of the budget on large budget productions, up to 50% more is used for marketing and distribution. So if it costs 100 million to do all the production, it might cost 50 million more for all the advertising they're doing and all of the marketing and distribution to get it to theaters and things like that.
Yeah, so they actually have that aside, because otherwise it'll make it look like the movie costs more to make when you add the distribution costs, because they are so high. So it can sometimes make it seem like it was more expensive than it was, even though technically that is part of the overall cost, but because most of the time it's delegated to another department, they can.
It's a given. I'm sorry to interrupt. It's a given.
No, yeah, like you need to distribute, obviously, but because most of the time it's delegated to another department, and they want to make it seem like, oh, this only costs this much, or they want to like separate the overall cost of the actual production, pre, post, and production. They prefer to separate it from distribution, because that's a whole other beast.
Yeah, now for independent films and for lower budget projects, they really need to budget in their distribution into their overall budget. So if you only have $30,000 for the entire project, you need to make sure that that accounts for the distribution as well. Because by the time you get to distribution, if you run out of funding, if you don't have any funds, you spent your whole 30,000, you are going to have really hard time getting anything out to anyone, because you don't have any money to spend on ads, or to make posters, or to make a trailer, or to do like some kind of social media campaign where you're trying to get people to raise awareness for the film, or just to make the theatrical DCPs and things that are needed to actually distribute to these different avenues.
Yeah, if you don't have money
technologically
separated,
get the right requirements made for the different platforms that need them in a specific format and things like that. If you don't have money to be able to get those done, it's going to be really hard to distribute anywhere. And it's also going to be really hard to get anybody to realize that you've even made a film in the first place.
Honestly, I would say that if you don't have a decent amount at least separated for distribution, and you don't take into account distribution on your overall budget, it was basic. I would consider that a waste of the entire film. Because what's the point of making a film, of spending all this money, pre-production and post, for you to basically be like, oh, okay, now it's out there. Now we have no way of putting it out there. We have no way of showing it to people. We have no way of making people aware of it. Basically wasted money. Because you forgot like a super important part, which was, how do I get people to actually see my film? To actually
so a lot of
discover
independent filmmakers will end up just posting it on YouTube and then getting a few hundred views or less. And it sucks. So you really have to take into account the cost of distribution. And while self-distribution can be a lot cheaper than the traditional route, it still is very expensive because there's all these different elements that go into it. However, if you don't have enough funding for it, you can also try to raise funds for distribution through Kickstarter or by finding investors if possible. It's not always going to work out that way. I would recommend trying to budget it in beforehand. But if you get to the point and you need it, even nyfa.edu, they recommend trying to raise funds another way for like a second round of funding to get the rest of your, basically to fund distribution, to fund advertising and distribution and getting your movie out there. If you need more money at that point, because you're going to need several prints of your poster, one for each theater that you're trying to show your film in. They're going to want a poster. So you're going to need those big, huge movie theater posters, one for each at least. And you want to remember to get those early so that you have them ready to go and ready to be shipped to whatever theaters accept your movie and are going to show it. You also want to create social media specifically for your project, as well as getting cast and crew to post on their own accounts. That way they raise awareness of anybody who's a fan of theirs, of anybody who wants to support them. Hey, I've recently worked on this movie. Hey, I recently acted in this movie. Whatever they did in the project, ask them to post on their social media. And it's even more beneficial actually to put it into your contracts whenever you're hiring people, that they are required to post on social media after the movie is getting, at a certain point, after post-production is wrapped or something. You tell them that you will tell them when, but they are required to post on their social media. And so another good thing that independent people sometimes will look for is whenever they're hiring people, they'll try to see, do they have any kind of following on social media? This actor that I'm going to hire, do they have fans? Do they have people that are following them? Are they posting a lot to different social media platforms and different websites and things? And are people seeing that, and do people care? Because if they do, and they are doing all that, posting about your film will just get more people, more eyes on it, and more support when it comes out. And then also putting it in the actor's contract that they have to post about it. Hopefully they want to anyway because they acted in it. But even if they end up not liking the film and they don't want to post in it, that's why you have it in the contract, so that they still do. So they still reach their audience and say, hey, I acted in this film, and go check it out if you can. So then that way you get more people to know about your film, and it raises awareness and it spreads a little bit farther than it would if it's just you doing all of the posting. You want to share the trailer, the poster, the key art, descriptions of some of the cast and crew, small snippets of scenes or part of the script, comments and insight on the process, behind the scene shots and production stills, and even just thoughts unrelated to the film, just to keep your name and the name of your project in the air. So through your social media accounts, you want to post all this different stuff to keep engagement, to keep interest. And like they said, like even if it's unrelated to the film, you still might want to post through your account just so people are still aware that that's a thing and that it's still coming out. Because obviously post-production and distribution take a while to get done. We're still working on our short film, and we finished filming it in November of last year. So, problems arise and things happen to where you have to, and even if there's no problems, there's still going to be a long process to get it fully complete. So to keep interest and keep people entertained, you want to keep posting to those social media that are specifically for that project, so that they know that it's still alive and that didn't just disappear. Because that's what happens to a lot of independent projects, unfortunately. They run out of funding and then they just stop posting, and everyone who was supporting it either forgets about it, or they're like, hey, what happened to you? And they don't get a response because the person stopped posting because they just gave up. So being one of those independent distributors, if you're a self-distributor, you're doing all the marketing yourself, and you need to make sure that people are aware that it's still going, that it's still live, and that it's still going to come out, and keep them updated. And doing all of those different things will help keep interest in your project. And then you also want to keep track of who is following you, who is commenting, who's liking, and who's looking at your posts. What are their ages, their ethnicities, their gender, and where are they from? You can start to figure out who might like this film, what your target audience might be, just from who's coming to it, who's looking at it. Social media like Facebook, Instagram, I don't think Snapchat does it, but there's a bunch of different social media that Twitter, I believe, does it too, where they show you analytics of who is liking it, who's looking at it, how many likes it's getting.
I think TikTok as well.
TikTok as well, YouTube.
A lot of music and people are being discovered on there right now.
And they give you the analytics for your channel or your account saying who is coming to your account. So if they have a profile that says they are a female and they are 22 years old and they live in Baltimore, then you know that they'll share that information with you if they're liking your stuff or if they're looking at it. And that way you can see who's looking at it, who's liking it, who's commenting on it, and then who started following or subscribing to your account. Because just because people look at it, that doesn't mean that they are interested in it. So it can also be that 22-year-old looked at the account, but all the other 22-year-olds don't like it, comment, or anything else. They just look and then they keep moving. But these other people that are 32 or 35, they start liking it and commenting on it. So it looks like my target audience is around somewhere in their 30s for now, and it can range different things, different areas, depending on all of these different things. But you definitely want to look into it and follow the analytics to see who it is, because it can really help with marketing and advertising to your audience and figuring out who your audience actually is. When self-distributing, distribution is limited, which makes the efficient targeting very important. And that's why you want to know who is following you, so you can know you have a limited budget to advertise to people. But again, those sites and those social medias and websites, they know the information of the people that are looking at the content. So the advertisers, if you're going to go advertise on YouTube right now, you can say that you only want to advertise to males in their 40s to 60s. And that could be for various reasons, because you figured out that that's your target audience. That way you can target just those people so you get more interest, instead of just targeting to hundreds of thousands of people that aren't going to be interested in it at all. You're targeting the people that, most of them might still not be interested, but more than likely a bigger chunk of them will be interested than just broadly advertising to everybody, because you've kind of targeted who you think likes your product or your film in this instance. Be sure to think carefully about what dates you choose to release your film. Try to avoid the summer and the late fall releases, because you'll be going up against some of the largest blockbusters that come out that year. Marvel movies, Disney movies, well, Disney is Marvel, but like the Marvel movies, Star Wars movies, and the big, huge blockbusters come out around the holidays, the fall season, before everybody gets off for Thanksgiving and Christmas. And then summer, when everyone's out of school and everything, and everybody's going to the movies. Those are when the biggest movies come out. So
they seem more profitable, like, oh, it's good because it has more people going to the cinema and more people watching it. But you also have to be careful, because especially if you're a small new company, independent company, you will be going up against a lot of huge names. So you have to take that into consideration for your first few projects. well, it may be if you're a little more established, you can try those dates, or maybe if you want, you can do like very end of summer. Huh?
Can you stop moving the things around while you're
Oh,
talking?
sorry. You can do like very end of summer or the very beginning of fall. Like you can still try to schedule it in those dates, but just be very careful and be aware of the dates where these huge companies will advertise their films so that you don't get swallowed up by them.
Yeah, because if you're trying to go theatrically, you can do it you can self-distribute to theaters. It's possible. And it's a viable way to get people to take your film more seriously. But when self-distributing, you have to take all of this stuff that if you hired a distributor, they would be taken into consideration. You have to take all that into consideration yourself. So you have to be thinking about, what am I going up against? Who am I going up against? The biggest movies that come out get the most screens as well. So the biggest blockbusters that come out, they take over most of the theater because the theater wants to show it every 15 minutes so that everyone who wants to go see the movie can see it at any time, and they don't lose out on ticket sales because somebody can't watch it at 8 o'clock and they don't want to go to a 10 o'clock showing. Well, now they have it showing at 8, 8:15, 8:30, 8:45. So they can come at any point. Just because they can't make 8 o'clock doesn't mean they're not going to come. And because of that, the smaller independent projects get shoved out because they're not going to get as many ticket sales. They're not going to be as well known. So nobody's going to really like go see it. And people are going to the theaters to actually watch the big blockbuster films. So you really have to think carefully about if you want to go against that or not. That's why keeping costs and release dates in mind is very important. You want to release in windows as well. So you want to start with the theater. If you're going to try for theatrical release, you want to start with doing only a theatrical release. You don't want to release it to theaters and online and here and there. No, you want to start with just the theater. And then you want to do renting digitally or buying digitally through video on demand services like if you can get it on Amazon or Vimeo, and just selling it, or your own website for the project. Vimeo, what'd you say?
Tubi, that's a huge one.
Not Tubi. Tubi is a streaming service.
Oh.
Talking about
I
like
think that's
renting or
streaming.
buying.
Right, oh, right, yeah, Netflix, sorry, not Netflix, Amazon Prime, YouTube has it as well, where you can buy some films. There's.
Is that for anybody or just for the?
I've
Does
seen
YouTube set that?
some real crap on there that you can rent, so.
Oh, I don't know. So if YouTube allows it, I'm not sure if YouTube allows it or not, but if they allow it for renting or buying your project, if you're allowed to set it up and YouTube doesn't do that, that's another option.
That might be
But
something
basically
to-
just any platform where you can set the price for your rent or your buy, like your own website, of course, and then people can choose whether they want to rent it and see your film or whether they want to buy it and have it for
And big
forevermore.
companies do that too. They will release it in theater first, and then they will stream, and then they will release it to DVD. So. that
Yeah,
is-
most recently they start doing a little bit of a mixture now, but they usually will do it in those windows because it just makes the most money.
And even now, when they do the mixture, they only do it for like really large movies that they don't want to miss out. They know that it's like gonna be like a lot of people are gonna want to see it, but not necessarily everyone will want to go to the theater. Those are the only movies that they're releasing at the same time. Or the ones that they're just like, oh, we don't think it's gonna make enough money if it's just released in theaters. So we're just gonna release it on both because I don't think there's enough hype for people to want to go to the theater just for that.
Yeah. But for self-distributing, you really, if you're going to try for theatrical, you want to stay solely theatrical and then move on to the digital or digital renting and buying. And then you think about streaming, if you're able to get it on a streaming service, and home video. Self-distributing to streaming services is incredibly difficult. So you probably will have to go with an aggregator at that point, but that is a way cheaper option than a distributor, and it's kind of like self-distributing. If you're doing fully self-distributing, then you have to try to get on streaming services that are a little more niche and that will accept unsolicited film pitches. The biggest ones don't, because they don't have time to review thousands of films a month or a year, however many come out. I don't know, probably thousands a month. So they go through pre-established partners and companies that they've worked with before. But the smallest ones, the ones that don't get as many people distributing on their platforms, and the ones that are more niche, like if you make a horror film and there's a horror-based streaming service that's a little bit smaller, then you could try to contact them directly and get your film on there, and it could work. They're still going to have technical requirements that you have to meet, and then you have to make sure that you are meeting everything that they say, whether they say to give them a stereo and a 5.1 surround audio version of the film, if it's available, whether it's in standard or standard HD or 4K, and all of that. You'll have to make sure that all of your technical requirements meet with their standards and what they need. There's also YouTube. If you can't get it on any other streaming service, a lot of people will post their film to YouTube after they try for theatrical and for renting and buying digitally for like a month or whatever. And then they'll just post it for free on YouTube and let people watch it. And then there's also paid TV and free TV if you can work out deals. Usually you can't when you're self-distributing. Again, cable and broadcast networks, they try to get people that they know are going to deliver in the correct format and on time. And so they don't work as often with unsolicited requests, and they don't work with independents as much that have not done it before or have not had a pre-established relationship with them. But it is not impossible to get a deal for your movie to be on their channel, for them to be able to show your film in one of their time slots. So it depends, and you can always try for it, but just do your research first and make sure it's going to a channel that reflects your film, that's going to match with what your film is. It's going to show the kind of content that you made. For release, you alternatively may want to consider counter programming. So that is, if the big summer movie is a sci-fi epic, your low-key drama may actually be a good alternative for audiences that go to the movies but don't want to see a sci-fi movie that night. And so that is also another thing to consider, and is another distribution plan avenue to take. Instead of saying, oh, I'm going to avoid summer and fall because they have the biggest movies, you can look at the lineup and say, oh, I'm actually going to put mine in because mine is very unlike these other films out there. So if people are going to the movies on a date or something and they go, hey, what do you want to see? And they're like, I don't like superhero movies, and that's all that's showing right now besides your film, well, then they might take the alternative and watch your film. So you might actually get more people watching it because of that.
It's always good to study the market.
Yeah, it's always good to study the market, and there's tons of different marketing plans, even for the biggest companies, and sometimes they do it right, sometimes they do it wrong, and sometimes they do it right, but it just doesn't work out for whatever reason. Sometimes they do it wrong, but they just catch on and it works out because of whatever reason. So there's different reasons, different strategies to it, but it's just something to really take into consideration whenever you're doing it all alone. What is this? Oh, nyfa.edu. They recommend if you're only doing 1 or 2 screenings at the theater, you should probably choose either Mondays or Tuesdays, or days when an audience isn't likely to be doing something else. So you don't really want to choose a weekend, because even though that's the day that everybody goes out, they usually already create plans, or they have something else that would be maybe more interesting than seeing some unknown film that they've never heard of.
And there's always those people, well, I know I'm one of those people, and I know a few people that go to the movies on Tuesdays or Wednesdays because normally those are the days where you get tickets half off, and you just want to see something, and you see something that sounds interesting, and you're like, yeah, I'll try it.
Yeah, so when you're going to theaters to show your film and you're making deals with the movie theaters, depending on what kind of deal you're making, you're either making a deal for them to show it for a certain number of weeks or just a certain number of showings. So if you only have a few showings, then you really want to pick and choose which days and times that it's getting shown to make sure you're trying to maximize and efficiently maximize the days that you get, the showings that you get. Also,
that's another thing, right? Because if you're doing it throughout the week, that means that there will be more slots open, since most of these big companies are probably going to want weekend slots.
yeah, that too, because the weekends are going to be the biggest draw for any big film. So they're going to want to take over as many weekend slots as they can. And the theaters know that people want to watch the big films. So they want to put them in more slots because they make more money that way. And so it's easier to also get into theaters by saying, oh, can you show my movie in, some weekday? But another thing to take into account with that, I would say, is if you have kind of figured out your target audience, bless you, if you figured out your target audience and like their age and where they're at and everything like that, you can kind of figure out what would be the best time to show the movie, just based on generalizations. Of course, it might not actually work for everybody, but you could say, teenagers are my main draw, so I definitely don't want to do it during school hours because they're probably going to be in school and they're not going to see it. I want to do it right after school, or I want to do it at night. Not too late though, because they probably have school the next night. So those things are like stuff to take into consideration depending on the age group and the ethnicities and the gender and the location of the audience that you have targeted so far. Also, if you're able to, touring from city to city, showcasing your film and having Q&As, question and answers, may be a good strategy to help build an audience. Be sure to, if you do this, to stagger the dates while also building word of mouth about your project, if you're doing that. So one of the people said that they did this, they went from city to city and they were posting their movie up to, well, they were not posting, they were distributing their movie to theaters, and they were doing it from city to city. In one city, it would do really well. So then the next city would give them a better deal because they would see that the movie did well in the city next door. And so then they just kept going from city to city doing that. But every city they went to, they would also pass out a bunch of flyers and go to people around the neighborhoods and just put like a flyer or a postcard or something in their door that said something about the film and where it would be and how they can watch it.
Right now, I would say this might just be an opinion, but in my opinion, I feel like more than ever, people going to the theater now, the majority of them are just people who enjoy going to the theater because you have so many options now. It's so much easier to stream at home. So most of the people going to the theater, it's either because they have families and they want something to do, friends, family want an outing, or because they genuinely enjoy going to the theater. So I feel like that might make it easier for people who actually enjoy film and actually, frequent it a little more to get to know about the film. I could be wrong, but that's just an opinion.
And there's also people who really like supporting independent productions and creatives and artists to help them get their foot in the door because it's such a closed off industry because it costs so much. So some of them really like to help support when they can. And so the people going through each city and communicating.
Especially if your film has to do with something like advocating for a specific group or cause, or if it's a story based on a specific group or cause, or something that's really passionate to you, you might go to like certain groups, Facebook groups, organizations, schools that have like outings. And you know, growing up, I remember my school, there would be these small production companies that would come in and distribute like copies of their movies that they would make, and they were for children. And we'd have also like a day where our school would take us to the movies and we watched like a film, an independent film based on either a true story or like an uplifting film about the community, something like that.
Yeah, so depending on what your subject matter is and what your film's about, can also help benefit could also help you figure out where to try to spread the word of mouth by going to these different organizations, going to these different locations and areas, and talking about your film and giving them flyers and things like that to pass around to people. If it's something educational, especially going to schools and giving it to the teachers and the principals and saying, hey, if you could pass these out to your students, you know, this is going to be our film. And then that might get the school wanting to rent it out later. And having an educational rental can be worth a lot more than just like one person renting it.
Yeah, when I say that, I'm talking about the US and Brazil. It's not just Brazil. Like in the US, I remember, I don't remember if it was because Massachusetts had like a program about it or something, but I remember them in Florida, specifically those two states, would have a lot of people that would come in and share DVDs or programs and films that they were creating. They were educational or for just kids.
Yeah.
Dakota, do you remember the Super Size Me? Priscilla, do you remember Super Size Me? It was
even like a
Super
commercial?
Size Me. No, it was a guy who he ate McDonald's fast food, I think like for like 3 months.
Oh, you're talking about the film, like the documentary?
Film, yeah.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, the reason why I say that because I was working at I started a program at Pace, and I chose Supersize Me. And you know what they do? They provided so many things, we reached out to them. And not only the video, they provided literature. And I had to create some literature, as well for it. So it was like a whole semester. we watched it, and then we came like with a conclusion. But I said that to say that they did really well, releasing it, in schools.
Oh yeah, like getting the word out about what their film is,
yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so like if depending on what your subject matter is, you definitely have the advantage of going to certain places like a school and being like, hey, this is about something that we feel like you might be interested in teaching, or letting the students learn, or it's a family-friendly film and it's about this, and that, and the lesson is this. And that way you're outreaching to more people than you would with something else. Now, if you don't have subject matter,
I will
that can be
always
played in
remember.
school, you
I
can
don't
still go
remember.
to certain places and do basically self-advertising in certain areas for whatever your subject matter is, based on the area and the place and stuff like that. Go ahead, Priscilla.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I don't remember which production company it was, but I have this vivid memory of me being like in 3rd grade or something, and this group of people coming in and distributing their distribution company, and they had 2 films, and it was The Secret Garden 2, and it was another one which was it was The Princess and the Pea. And even though those films, in hindsight, looking back, they weren't the best, but they were smaller productions, and they really stood out to me as a child. So distributing in schools, if you have like a story, and they had like moral lessons. Like I remember that The Secret Garden 2 was all about being a friend and knowing, like, not being selfish and caring for others and all this stuff. So knowing your target audience and the demographic you want to show, and learning how to pitch that to organizations, to schools, to places that you know it might be good for, I think that might be really beneficial, especially for independent creators and small production companies to get their name out there.
Yeah, because word of mouth can really start to spread. Now, word of mouth with these, like if you're traveling from city to city doing this, you have to also be aware that the next city you go to is probably not going to know anything about this film. That's both good and bad. It's good because the theaters will be more willing to accept your film. It doesn't feel old, so it's not like they're showing an old film. They're showing a new film that nobody's heard of, so it's more likely that people will buy tickets for it in that city. But you also have to kind of redo all of your advertising and word of mouth spreading to get the people in that city interested. But yeah, a lot of independent filmmakers that are successful with their films will do a slow distribution format like that, where they're going from city to city to actually get maximizing their profits. It's just going to take a bit longer and be a bit more work.
Yeah, it sounds hands-on too.
Very hands-on, yes.
Yeah,
That's
we
what self-distributing is going to be, very hands-on. Very. You're
Yeah.
doing everything yourself to try to get your film out there. So it's very like just doing whatever you can to get your name out there, to get people to be aware of the film and to be getting people to pay money to go see it. You have to do a lot of work to do that. And they also say before posting to YouTube for streaming, you might want to consider some of the smaller streaming platforms that you may be able to self-distribute with. Some of these are the smaller ones like PureFlix, which I believe that one is a Christian-based streaming platform. There's IndieFlix.
And they accept a lot of crap. So, if yours is half decent. No offense to PureFlix.
No comment.
They have some good stuff too. They have some good stuff too. They really do. It's just because it's a lot of independent stuff. It varies. You can find some very good things. Like I know that A Case for Christ is on there, and that's a very good movie. And I know that there's a lot of apocalyptic films that I've seen reviews of that are not the best. So at the end of the day, those platforms are going to be more of a mix. But when the good thing about them is if you have a built-in audience, let's say a Christian audience, and you have a platform just for that and people that are looking for family-friendly films, Christian films, that kind of thing, you already have a built-in audience and a place where they can go to find your film, and it's easier to find your film. Like I said, I'm sorry, it was a joke. I do appreciate it, and I like that they are giving, new voices to new creators and maybe some good things coming out of it slowly. But it's a given. It's not because it's Christian. It's not because of anything like that. With any streaming service that is new and that is giving space for a lot of independent creators, you will have a mixed bag.
Well, it's
And
also
that's just
that
something
very
to share.
niche because they're only accepting Christian films. They have to
Yeah.
accept the Christian films that come out that want to distribute on their platform.
And there's not that
there's
many.
There's less of a market for it.
So they have
but
to
then there's
fill
also
all that.
IndieFlix. IndieFlix does one specifically for independent films. So it's a streaming service for people who want to specifically watch, like Priscilla would say, crap, I guess.
I'm sorry. It was
I'm
a
just
joke.
kidding.
I
I'm just kidding.
have a very
I'm just kidding. And I
sarcastic-
agree. But I also agree that larger films are crap too. So
Yes.
it's not really like their production budgets are bigger. And so the quality of the looking of it is good. But
I
their
just want to make it
story is
clear. I have a
crap.
very sarcastic sense of humor. I have a very dark sense of humor sometimes. And when I said I tend to mock, I have a very mocking sense of humor. I did not mean that, oh, they're crap because they're low budget. No, honestly, I've seen some that have quite a high budget and they're not my favorite either. So, and that goes for many movies.
Yeah, I was just joking.
Yeah, but I just want to make that
But-
clear because I don't want anyone saying that like, oh, she's a film snob or like,
So PureFlix is for Christian films. IndieFlix is for independent films. Crunchyroll, if you're doing any kind of anime, they do a bunch of type of anime stuff. So if you're
when
making
they're really good. they have like they're widening their selection. They're becoming a lot more of a thing now. And it's a way that a lot of people can discover anime that is a little more niche and harder to find, in my experience.
Yep. And there's also Acorn TV, Mubi, MUBI, Fandor, FANDOR.
Oh yeah, movie. I've seen
Mubi.
a few documentaries on it that are very good as well. As far I know a lot of YouTubers and stuff that will promote it. It's a
because they have cult classics, but they also have modern stuff, and then they also have for some of the greatest directors, they say, but also new directors. So they give the independent
It's a very
filmmakers and new
creative-based
filmmakers
platform, yes.
a platform to be able to distribute to, as well as having some of the cult classics. Like it looks like they have what's that movie called? I know the name, I just can't think of it right now. The Hotel.
Oh, you also have Magellan TV, which is becoming a really big thing as far as the documentary scene. So if your niche is documentaries and you enjoy making them, and that's what you want to make, I know that they add new documentaries every single day. So that could be an option for you if documentaries are your thing. Just to watch too. They have some really good ones.
There's also Fandor. There's Shudder. That's for horror. And also Screambox. That's for
I've
horror
heard a lot
as
about
well.
Shudder as well. It's becoming a lot bigger in the horror scene. And there's a lot of a mix between like classics and new creators.
And so there's also Screambox if you can't get on Shudder and you have a horror film. Those two, and there's probably more. There's also Kino Cult. Not exactly sure which ones these have, but Crackle. Like Priscilla said, there's Tubi. I think I'm not sure. I think Tubi now requires like a aggregator or a distributor to get on their platform because they're getting a lot bigger than they used to be.
Oh yeah,
They might still allow for independents to self-distribute to their platform, but I'm not 100%.
I would say look at their terms and conditions and their criterias, because I have a few crime and investigation YouTube channels that I follow, and one of them just participated in a documentary on Tubi, and it was a smaller production. I know that it wasn't like very largely distributed. I also know a few documentaries that were distributed that were in part distributed by the families of the loved ones of the people that were the victims, as well, with a smaller production company that's gone into Tubi and Magellan TV and all those kinds of things. So that might, I don't know if that changed, but I know very recently I heard of a few documentaries that were like not super low budget, but that were very independently made that got
right,
on.
but it still doesn't.
But I would recommend
whether
looking at
they
their
like
terms.
let you self-distribute to it. Aggregators, they take a certain percentage out of the sales, so you could still get an aggregator whether you have very low budget or not. So it really depends on the platform, which is why you always want to check it out first, like Priscilla said, to see what their requirements are, because some of them don't allow unsolicited pitches, which would be you just contacting them, pitching your movie to them to get them on the platform.
And there is some very good stuff on Peerflix too, just to make it clear, so I don't sound like I'm saying, "Oh,
you already said it." All right, I'm moving on.
I know, it just made it seem, because I was.
There's
like,
also Argo.
It's
watchargo.com, and that's artists going places. That's what it stands for. So it's very much for independent and startups and people like that, because they want to support artists, new artists especially. There's Real House, REEL, Real House. And there is Alta VOD, VOD. So there's a bunch of different ones, streaming services. So you don't have to just rely on, well, I can't get into Netflix, Amazon Prime, Hulu, HBO Max, and Apple TV. So I might as well just post it on YouTube. There's still
Roku
plenty.
TV also
There's
has
still
a lot
plenty. What?
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, I know that there's Roku TV and all those other ones that are also ad-based and depending on their criteria, you can also apply to. It's growing. The number of platforms for that independent creators have a space or are able to put their stuff in there are growing every single day.
There's also Vizio and other TV distributors, TV makers. They also have like free channels like that people can watch streaming straight through their thing, and they buy it. So they are smaller. I'm not sure. Again, they might need an aggregator or they might need a distributor to be able to get in contact with them and to post onto their platform. But because they're smaller, they are going to be easier to get in contact with. So just because you can't get on Netflix and HBO Max and Hulu and all these largest ones because you're self-distributing, that doesn't mean that you're not going to be able to get on any streaming services, because there's a bunch out there and they're very niche, they're very small. Some of them are very specific. Some of them are specifically for short films. So if you have a short film, you might be able to get it on certain platforms. Also, some of them are specifically for independent films. So you want to look into that before just posting to YouTube, because YouTube, you're not really going to make money, really. Where on these other ones, you probably won't make very much money, but at least you'll make more than you would on YouTube.
Another downside of YouTube is that it's very, their algorithm is very like 1 minute is one thing, 1 minute's another. 1 minute's short form content, 1 minute's long form content. And there's so much being uploaded to it every day. So the chances of your project being found are also a lot smaller, as opposed to a more niche website like the ones we mentioned.
Right, and those can also help for your future projects to, I would say, it adds legitimacy. Instead of being like, yeah, I have a film, it's on YouTube, you could say, yeah, I have a film, it's on IndieFlix. And that just adds a little bit more legitimacy to your past projects because it's on a platform. And a lot of these platforms, the smaller ones, don't have exclusive rights deals, which means that you can post to multiple streaming services or multiple platforms. So you could still post it to YouTube and also try to post it on one of these platforms as well, because the audiences that are built in, like Priscilla was saying, the audience that's watching PureFlix, that's subscribing to it, watching it specifically for Christian films, are probably subscribed to other places. But the people that aren't on PureFlix might be watching it through YouTube. It doesn't mean that they're always crossing over. So it doesn't mean that they're going to not watch it on PureFlix because they're going to go watch it on YouTube. It doesn't mean they're not going to watch it on IndieFlix because they're going to watch it on YouTube instead. It's usually people on IndieFlix are watching stuff on IndieFlix, people on YouTube watching stuff on YouTube. Sometimes it crosses over, but not as much as you'd think. So whenever you don't have an exclusive rights deal with a streaming platform, it allows you to post to as many platforms as you can get on, which can very much increase your awareness of the film for everybody and the revenue that comes in, because you're getting money from all these different platforms that are showing to different audiences. Also, these platforms are a lot easier to get in contact with because they're a lot smaller. They don't have as many submissions because people are vying for the biggest ones like Netflix and all of those. So they're still going after these, of course, but not as many people are as the largest platform. So they're easier to get in contact with, and they have those various niche media. So it allows you to really zone in on whatever your content you're making. Like Priscilla was saying, there's some that are specifically for documentaries. So if you made a documentary film, then those are perfect for you because they're specifically for that. If you made a horror film, then Shudder and Screenbox, they're perfect for you because those are specifically for horrors.
And at the end of the day, you think of it as you're not going into a place with less people. Don't look at it like that. You look at it as, I'm going to a platform where I have a way higher chance of actually reaching my specific audience, as
also
opposed
just
to a
it being
place.
seen, because even things that get on Netflix has such a huge library that they're not going to advertise your movie for you unless it's really big. And since it's an independent film, even if you got on Netflix, like it doesn't mean everybody's going to watch it. So that's also something to think about and consider, because these are actually, you could start building a audience from this. They could say, who made this? I want to see more of their stuff. And then the next project you make, you have fans that are ready to watch, ready to support, ready to follow you on Facebook, and start building your audience through those various platforms as well. So there's also that to think about. With all that being said, some of these are still going to only communicate through distributors or aggregators. So you always want to look into it and see whether they allow unsolicited submissions or not. And if they don't, then you want to consider whether you want to go with an aggregator or not, because you're still self-distributing for the most part. You're just adding in one more company. And it's not the same as distribution where you're giving away all your rights. It's just the aggregator is getting it ready for these platforms and has the contacts and connections to be able to get you in touch with them. So that is something to consider even when doing self-distribution. Self-distribution, though, is a great deal of work. Like Gabe was saying, if there's a lot of hands-on stuff you have to do to get it out there, there's a reason that productions with money choose to pay someone else to do it. And while it's extremely laborious, self-distribution isn't completely impossible if you're willing to put in the effort and you don't have the budget for the other option of the traditional distribution route. This stuff comes from raindance.org, letter V in the syllabus. Another way you can self-distribute and build a brand is by creating your own website and renting out your content from there. I actually said that earlier. For this, you'll need to direct traffic.
Oh, crap.
For this, you'll need to direct traffic to your site. So you'll need people to actually go to your website to be able to even see the film to rent it out. You can also host a merch store, allow buying of your films, and have updates on current and future plans to help grow your audience if they like your content. There are some pros to self-distribution. You have full control over the viewing experience and marketing to pricing. You don't have to wait for anyone or do any contracts depending on how you self-distribute. Like if you tried to self-distribute through a website, you don't really need any contracts for that. The middleman is cut out, which means what you do happen to make will go to you, all the money, instead of it getting taken out fees from each step of the process.
You'd still have the issue of distribution though, because
Nope.
no, I mean, like if you're on a website, it's going to be a lot harder for them to find you if you're on your own website. So you would have to be in charge of getting it out there
That's what I said.
for people to be aware of it.
Yeah, you'll have to direct traffic to your site.
No, that's what I mean. You'd have the issue of distribution because it would be all on you.
Well, these are the pros. There's a lot of room to grow with your own website with future content or collaborations with other filmmakers as well. You could also offer early bird discounts to let a certain number of people watch first. That way your most eager fans get a discount and get to come in really quickly to watch your film. Just help spread the word and advocate that it's good. You can also create time limited offers so that you create a sense of urgency. You know, if you get it within the next, it'll be $3 off if you get it within the next 5 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever.
Oh, I've also seen cases where the website will release it on their YouTube channel for free for a limited time and then on the website at a discount, or they will release it on their website for free for the first 24 hours and then it'll be paid to watch.
Oh, that's
afterwards.
interesting. Yeah, and that gets people to come see it, and then they'll be like, hey, that was actually pretty good. Let me tell my friend about it. Or, oh, I really liked what this guy did or this girl did. Let me help them and I'll go ahead and buy the film because it was good enough for me to support them. You can also run live Q&A sessions for the most avid fans. You can upload sneak peeks, stills, fan art, and podcasts to your site. You get in touch with independent reviewers, YouTubers, podcasts, and try to set up interviews or allow them to watch the film and talk about it on their platforms to their audiences.
Yeah, you'd be surprised how many podcasts there are just talking about film in general, independent films, promoting new creators and productions.
Mhm. According to So Created, which is letter X in the syllabus, there's something called Shorts TV that focuses specifically on short films from filmmakers around the globe. They air the shorts on their cable network as well as streaming online. And according to So Created, they pay about a few $100s per short when they accept one. So it's not much, but short films, typically you can't really distribute them anywhere. So that is kind of a good deal if you can't get it funding from anywhere else. Now for feature films, you don't want to go that route. You want to try to get it on other various platforms that don't pay up front unless they have a non-exclusive deal and you feel like it's a fair amount of money. Then you can go ahead and take those deals. This next stuff comes from filmmakerfreedom.com. It's letter Z in the syllabus. Like I said earlier, aggregators are a good way to have control over your project, but also to have the opportunity to get on more streaming services. The aggregator will take a fee, but it's often much smaller than a traditional distributor. For theaters, you could look into doing a deal for a,
Hi.
yeah.
Can you please remove the creepy clown from the screen?
No. For theaters, you could look into doing a deal with a one night only event. Theatrical distributors such as Fathom Events. That's another, there you go. Fathom Events, they're like a distributor that will do a one night in a theater or one night on their streaming service kind of thing, so that you can release your film, but it's only for one day. And that way you're not stuck in a huge contract with a distributor for years. You just get with them for basically an event. The
If you're
event
doing it
being
in
your
a
film.
physical theater, that's also like,
That's what this is, yeah.
no, yeah, I'm saying you also have the benefit of meeting people, making connections, possibly.
Oh yeah. You can also do what's called four wall, a cinema screen, and that's where you pay a flat rental fee to the exhibitor or the theater. And then you promote the release yourself and you get to keep all the ticket revenue. So if you feel like you have enough local support, that could be a good option. You just kind of rent out the room and rent out the movie screen for however long you need it. And you show your film to people and you spread the word that you're going to be showing your film. That's also kind of how they probably did it when they were going from city to city, showcasing their film and doing a live Q&A. Usually you do it like that. You rent out the room and then you do the live Q&A after the movie's over. But if you're going city to city and you're making money and the film is doing well in theaters, you might be able to just get it without having to do those deals, where it's the traditional, the theater takes their cut and they give you the rest of the money kind of thing, where you don't pay anything up front. It just depends on how well it's doing, how well it's being received. But you should always factor in self-distributing cost into your budget like you would post-production and the production itself. If you are planning to self-distribute, you still need to think about all the costs that is going to come with it and plan that into your budget so that you can actually do it, so you can actually self-distribute. Depending on your budget, you may not want to go with self-distribution. If you make a film for like $50,000 or less, it may make sense to self-distribute because you have a better chance of making that money back. You might not, but you still have a better chance if you're doing self-distribution. You still have a good chance of making your 50,000 or more and start to get a profit. But if your budget was, say, something like 200,000 or more, it doesn't really make sense to self-distribute because you really need to hire someone that can help generate those revenue levels you now need to break even or to make a profit. So basically, depending on your budget, you may want to go with one or the other just based on that alone. Self-distributing is a lot harder to make money, obviously, because you don't have all the connections. You can't post to certain places and all of that other information we just went over. And because of that, if your film is over a certain amount of money, it's very likely you're never going to reach your budget level and break even, much less make a profit. But if you hire a distributor at a certain point, if you have a budget that was big enough for it, like 200,000 or more, they say, they're going to have a better chance of getting you that money because they're going to be able to distribute it farther and wider to more places and to have those connections for those better deals than you would have been able to do on your own. This comes from a TED Talk. It's letter D in the syllabus. It was a guy, the video is called How I Created the Most Successful Self-Distributed US Theatrical Film, Steven Simpson. He says, many filmmakers go the route of paying to get into theaters in the largest cities first, like LA and New York, but then go on to smaller cities if the film does well. He decided to do the opposite, vying for more focused, targeted cities that were much smaller. And in this way, his project was more of a big fish in a small pond instead of a small fish in an ocean. From many of the other sources, they seem to do something similar for theatrical release. With self-distribution in a small indie film, it's often more lucrative, but also time-consuming and hands-on to release to theaters in batches. So you start in certain areas, then you branch out to ones close by, and then you move on to the next city and so on, instead of attempting to release everywhere all at once. You want to stay out of, if you do that though, you want to stay out of national news sources and stick to local news, because that way that film is new to each city you go to. When doing this technique, oh, right, that's what I just said. So it'll be like new for each city. No one wants to see an old film, but by releasing slowly, locally, you can then expand distribution timeline for theaters because it's still new to them. Nobody's heard of it in that area. So no one outside of the places you screened have heard of the film yet. So you can keep screening to new theaters. And then you also have the numbers for the theaters to say, look, people have watched this film. And so it gives them a bigger reason to also put it in their own. Some films will, if they're self-distributed that way and they're done right, they can be distributed slowly throughout the whole nation for years. And the people can just go from city to city distributing, okay, now we're gonna hit there, now we're gonna hit there. The way that TED Talk guy, Steven Simpson did it, he found his target audience and he figured out the cities where the majority of that target audience would be, and he decided to distribute it there first, theatrically. That way, he got a lot of people that were more likely to like his film, to more likely to go see it, and give it praise, give it some good feedback. That way, when he went on to the next city, you could show how many people watched it and what the sources of the news were saying about it, like the local news, what they said. And he could also bring that information to the word of mouth as he's spreading it around to the new city. He can say, here's what other people have said about it. They said they really loved it. So that there's more interest to watch the film in the next place. To self-distribute the right way, you really have to have a marketing strategy. And you have to not be afraid to ask for support and interest from any and everyone. We're going to talk more about marketing in the next semester. Sometimes it might actually be better to try for the bigger ones like LA and New York instead of going smaller and then bigger, because if it's received well and people actually go see it, you can get into the big publications like New York Times might do an article based on your movie and say what they thought and give a good review. And that's going to give you a lot more legitimacy than some small town in Arizona publication. But that's just a different marketing strategy. And it really depends on a multitude of different things to figure out what kind of marketing strategy you want to go with. And even if you have a marketing strategy, you need to be able to adapt it as you go. But the reason why a lot of independent filmmakers do this route is because it's a lot more lucrative, because you start getting more word of mouth, you start building an audience as you go, you start getting more interest from theaters, especially for films doing pretty decently or well, so that you can keep expanding outward. Because if you try to post everywhere all at once, you're done after the initial run, and no city is going to take it again after the initial run went all the way through, because they feel like the people who watched it, and the people who are going to come see it and buy tickets, they already did. And so they're less likely to show it again. Whereas if they've heard, oh, the city over there has done it, but nobody around here knows anything about it, then they might be likely to come watch it. And so it just gains more interest, gains more ticket sales, and gets better deals as you go. And then after you're done nationally, you can move on to international sales. But typically speaking, with self-distribution, you're not going to be able to do international sales unless you have connections. You almost always need to get a sales agent, an international sales agent, to help you with international distribution, because that's a complex web that we've talked about before. And if you're trying to do that, it's very lucrative, but you need to have somebody who knows what they're doing and knows about all these contracts and everything. But domestically, self-distribution isn't impossible, and a lot of people have done it, but you have to really put in a lot of effort and work, and you can't really be working on the next project until years later, because you're still working on finishing out this project. Distribution takes a long time to get fully wrapped, especially if you're doing it city by city. So you have to take the time and the cost into account if you're going to try to self-distribute it and self-distribute it right. But it can be advantageous to start getting an audience and just having the experience of being able to show your film all throughout the United States or whatever country you're in the theaters, which can be really cool. Does anyone have any questions, comments, or anything to add about self-distribution?
I do. Is there a timeline, like, so you started promoting your movie? Is there like a timeline, like it's a year and a half, where it would die down, like the hype, like the hype of your project? Does that happen?
Yeah, so if it really depends on how you're distributing it. If you're doing it through city to city, you could be doing it for years. It depends on how slowly you're moving through and how much prep work you're doing before you actually show the film to that city. A lot of these independent filmmakers will go to the city first, start spreading the word, like getting in contact with the schools like we were talking about earlier, doing the posters around town and handing out flyers, and then show the film. So it actually takes, a few weeks each city. And then, that can take months and months and years after a while, going from city to city like that. But if you are a film that's large enough, or if you just want to self-distribute and try to shotgun it all over the place to everywhere, the typical time it's going to be in theaters, I believe, is 3 weeks to 2 months. About the largest films can be in there for about, I think, 4 months max, but it's usually a lot less than that. And it really just depends on how much money they have. And at the 4-month mark, they're really not making any money. They're kind of just out because they want to spread the word more. And those are usually the films that are trying to win the Oscars and stuff like that. So they come out in like fall, and the Oscars happen, I think, like February, January?
Oh,
or
crap, I'm
March.
terrible.
It happens sometime in the beginning of the year. So they try to keep the movie out as much as possible so it's still in everybody's minds. But they really aren't making money at the point it gets to January. Whereas for a smaller film, you really only have like 3
Oscars
weeks.
are in March. March.
March, okay. So yeah, they try to keep it going, I think, through like January, maybe February, but then that's about it for those biggest films. And like I said, at that point, most of the money's going to the theater at that point, and not many people are going to go see it because everyone who was going to at that by 4 months in, and everybody who was going to go see it pretty much did. But for a small independent project, it's usually like 3 weeks or less if you're going to a bunch of theaters at once. If you're going to city, you might do a few showings, so it might be a week or two, and then you move on. After that, and after they distribute, if they do write any articles about your thing, it might be in the news for like a week or less, and then it's out. So it doesn't really stay that long. Even the biggest films, really, once they're talked about, everybody knows the secrets and everything, and spread around the social medias and everything, it's kind of moved on to the next thing. So
I get it.
yeah, I mean, it really depends.
Down.
It really depends on budget and like how much marketing you're able to get away with. But I would say the hype is building up until release, and then after release, it's only a few weeks.
4 weeks. Okay,
Yeah.
up to 4 weeks.
Yeah,
Okay, I
exactly.
get it.
Yep.
Okay.
All right. All right, so we still have our exercises. They're going to be due August 4th. It's the miniature exercise and the prop exercise. August 4th, that's next Thursday. The last thing I'll say is what we're studying for Monday. So Monday, we're going to be talking about weaponsmithing and a weapons master, what those are. Production design supplies and paint supplies. So things you might need if you're trying to do any kind of production design. And painting, you know, of course, like walls and stuff like that. Online distribution. We've talked about this a lot, so I don't know if there's going to be any new information, but if I find any, we'll discuss it. If not, I might recap some important things, but the majority I might just leave out because we already talked about it. DVD and Blu-ray distribution. We talked about this as well, but I feel like there might still be some new information there about like costs and things. So if there's new information, we'll talk about it. And then finding how much your film is worth and its revenue projection. We'll talk about how to do that, going into the market and figuring out, you know, how much is this film even worth? So how much can I try to set the budget for when I'm trying to gain financing and stuff like that? Or how much should I request from a distributor to know, like, you know, what's a good deal, what isn't for my film. But yeah, thank you guys. Thanks for coming. Appreciate you. Have a good weekend.
Cool. Great. Thank you. You too.
Bye, guys.
Later. Bye-bye.